Have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath the tranquil surface of America's small towns? What dark histories remain hidden in the depths of forgotten wells, abandoned mines, and sealed-off basements across this vast country? The story I'm about to share with you today might make you question every small town you've ever driven through without a second thought. It might make you wonder about the foundation your own home was built upon and what might be waiting just a few feet below to be discovered. Before I continue with this disturbing account, I'd like to ask you to take a moment to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the hidden truths that others want kept silent, and we need your support to continue bringing these stories to light. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Every subscription helps us continue our mission of revealing these dark secrets that have been buried for far too long. In the autumn of 2023, nearly 90 years after they vanished without a trace, the remains of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood were finally discovered at the bottom of an abandoned well on what was once their own property in Millfield, Ohio. The young couple had disappeared in 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, leaving behind an unsolved mystery that had faded from memory with the passing generations. What made this discovery particularly chilling wasn't just the revelation of their fate after all these years, it was the position in which they were found. The skeletal remains of Thomas and Eleanor were locked in an eternal embrace, their hands still intertwined, after 9 decades in the cold, dark depths of the forgotten well. The discovery occurred when developers began work on a new housing subdivision on the outskirts of Millfield. The land had changed hands numerous times over the decades, gradually transitioning from the Blackwood family farm to abandoned property, and finally to prime real estate for suburban expansion. During the initial groundbreaking, construction worker Michael Delaney was operating an excavator when the ground suddenly gave way, revealing the long-forgotten well beneath. "I've been in construction for 27 years, and I've found some strange things on job sites," Delaney later told the Millfield Gazette, "but nothing prepares you for seeing human remains. And the way they were positioned, holding onto each other like that, it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't like they'd just fallen in. There was something deliberate about it, something that didn't feel right." Police were immediately called to the scene, and what began as a routine recovery of human remains quickly evolved into something far more complex. The Athens County Sheriff's Department brought in forensic anthropologists from Ohio University to assist with the recovery and identification process. Dr. Catherine Wells, who led the forensic team, noted several unusual aspects about the remains from the very beginning. The position of the bodies suggested they died while embracing one another, Dr. Wells explained in her preliminary report. This is extremely rare in forensic cases involving wells or similar vertical spaces. Typically, when individuals fall or are pushed into such structures, their bodies are found in disarray, reflecting the trauma of the fall. But Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood appeared to have died while holding one another, their arms wrapped around each other's bodies, hands clasped together. It suggested something far more complex than an accidental fall or even a straightforward homicide. Initial carbon dating confirmed what local historians had already suspected. The remains dated back to the early 1930s. A search of county records revealed that the property had once belonged to Thomas Blackwood, a young farmer who had married Eleanor Sullivan in 1931. The couple had been reported missing in August of 1933 when Thomas failed to appear at a scheduled meeting with his bank regarding an overdue mortgage payment. At the time, their disappearance generated little official concern. It was the Depression, after all, and many families simply abandoned their farms and homes when they could no longer afford to keep them. The case might have remained a simple, if tragic, discovery of historical remains, had it not been for the meticulous work of Detective Sarah Harmon, a 34-year-old investigator with the Athens County Sheriff's Department who had recently transferred from Cleveland. Though the case was nearly a century old, Harmon felt compelled to discover the truth behind the couple's deaths. Something about this case felt unfinished, Detective Harmon would later explain. Maybe it was the way they were holding on to each other after all these years, or maybe it was the fact that no one had ever really looked for them. Either way, I couldn't let it go. These people deserved to have their story told. Even 90 years later, Harmon began by searching through county archives, local newspaper records, and historical society collections. She discovered that Thomas Blackwood had been 27 at the time of his disappearance, while Eleanor had been 24. They had married against the wishes of Eleanor's family, particularly her father, William Sullivan, a prominent businessman in nearby Athens who had wanted his daughter to marry into another successful family rather than to a struggling farmer. One of the first unsettling discoveries came from the Millfield Historical Society archives. A letter written by Thomas to his brother James, dated just 2 weeks before the disappearance, revealed a man under tremendous stress. "The bank is threatening foreclosure, and I don't know how much longer we can hold on. Eleanor says her father would help if I would only ask, but I cannot bring myself to beg from that man. He has made it clear what he thinks of me from the beginning. There are other concerns as well, which I dare not commit to paper." Strange things have been happening around the farm. Items missing, noises in the night. Eleanor is frightened, though she tries not to show it. "I've taken to keeping my father's old shotgun closer at hand. If matters don't improve soon, we may have no choice but to leave this place behind." This letter cast the disappearance in a new light. Had the couple simply fled their failing farm, as many had initially assumed? Or was there something more sinister behind their vanishing? The discovery of their remains in the well on their own property seemed to eliminate the theory that they had simply left town to start anew elsewhere. Detective Harmon continued her investigation by tracking down the descendants of people who had known the Blackwoods. Most were either deceased or had moved away from the area long ago, but she managed to locate Margaret Cooper, a 96-year-old resident of an Athens nursing home, whose mother had been a childhood friend of Eleanor Sullivan. During their interview, conducted with the permission of Cooper's physician and family, the elderly woman revealed a family secret that had been passed down through generations. "My mother told me, and her mother told her, that Eleanor and Thomas didn't just disappear. They were hiding from someone. Mother wouldn't say who exactly, but she always said it had something to do with Eleanor's father and some men he was involved with. Some kind of business arrangement gone wrong. Mother said Eleanor had discovered something she wasn't supposed to know, and that's why they had to disappear. But I guess they didn't disappear far enough, did they?" This intriguing lead sent Detective Harmon deeper into the history of William Sullivan, Eleanor's father. Sullivan had owned several businesses in Athens during the Depression, including a bank that had foreclosed on dozens of farms in the region, including, records showed, the Blackwood property, shortly after the couple's disappearance. But it was when Harmon began investigating Sullivan's other business interests that the case took a truly disturbing turn. Among the historical documents at Ohio University's archives, she discovered references to a little-known organization called the Athens Business Coalition, which appeared to be a group of prominent businessmen in the region during the Depression era. Sullivan had been a founding member of this coalition, which, according to the limited records available, had been formed to protect and advance the economic interests of Athens County during these troubled times. Further research revealed that several members of this coalition had acquired significant properties throughout the region during the Depression at fractions of their pre-crash values. Many of these acquisitions came after the original owners had mysteriously abandoned their properties, or in some cases, after they had died under questionable circumstances that were never fully investigated. One particular document caught Detective Harmon's attention: minutes from a coalition meeting held just 1 week before the Blackwoods' disappearance. The meeting had been held at Sullivan's home, and while the minutes were vague in their language, they contained a troubling reference. Discussion regarding the Blackwood situation. Mr. Sullivan assured members that the matter would be resolved promptly and to everyone's satisfaction. As Detective Harmon continued her investigation, she uncovered a pattern of suspicious deaths and disappearances throughout Athens County during the early to mid-1930s, all connected in some way to properties that were later acquired by members of the Athens Business Coalition. In most cases, these deaths had been attributed to the desperate circumstances of the Depression: suicides, accidents, or people simply leaving the area in search of work elsewhere. But when examined collectively, they formed a disturbing pattern that suggested something far more sinister. The investigation took another significant turn when construction workers continuing to develop the site made another discovery: a small metal box, buried several feet away from the well. Inside the box was a water-damaged journal, which forensic analysis determined had belonged to Eleanor Blackwood. Much of the journal was illegible due to water damage and decay, but several entries from July 1933 just weeks before the couple's disappearance, were still readable. July 10th. Thomas is worried about the mortgage, but that seems such a small concern compared to what I've discovered. Father's documents should never have been left in his study. I wasn't snooping. I was merely looking for the photograph album Mother had mentioned. But what I found instead, I can scarcely believe it. The names, the amounts, the properties listed. And Thomas's farm among them, marked for acquisition in August. I took the papers and left immediately. Father doesn't know I have them. I don't know what to do. If what these documents suggest is true, then Father and his associates are responsible for... Here the entry became illegible, with water damage obscuring several lines. July 15th. They know. Someone broke into the house while we were at church. The papers are still safe, but they know I took them. Thomas wants to go to the sheriff, but I'm not certain we can trust him. Sheriff Collins has been to Father's dinner parties too many times. We've decided to hide the papers in the old well out back. It's been dry for years and no one would think to look there. Thomas boarded it up long ago, but we can access it if needed. July 23rd. A man was watching the house today from the edge of the cornfield. When Thomas approached him, he ran off. Thomas recognized him as one of Father's employees. We're discussing leaving, heading west perhaps. But the farm has been in Thomas's family for generations. How can we simply abandon it? And yet, if we stay, The final legible entry was dated August 3rd, 1933. They came to the house today. Father, Mr. Caldwell from the bank, and two men I didn't recognize. Thomas wasn't home. He had gone to town for supplies. Father demanded the return of his papers. When I denied knowing what he meant, he became angry in a way I've never seen before. He said I didn't understand what I was involving myself in, that some matters were bigger than family. He said the coalition wouldn't tolerate interference, especially now when everything was proceeding as planned. When I heard Thomas's truck returning, Father and his associates left, but not before Father said, "This is your final warning, Eleanor. For your own sake, and for Thomas's, return what you took." I'm writing this now while Thomas loads the shotgun. We've agreed to take turns keeping watch tonight. After this entry, the journal contained only blank pages. Whatever had happened to Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood after August 3rd had never been recorded, or if it had, those pages had not survived the decades buried underground. The discovery of Eleanor's journal transformed the investigation. What had begun as the solving of a historical cold case now pointed to a potential conspiracy involving some of the most prominent historical figures in Athens County. But Detective Harmon faced a significant challenge. Nearly all of the individuals who might have been directly involved were long dead, and much of the evidence had been lost to time. Undeterred, Harmon expanded her investigation to include a thorough examination of property records throughout Athens County during the Depression era. She compiled a database of properties that had changed hands between 1929 and 1940, with particular attention to those acquired by members of the Athens Business Coalition. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. In at least 7 cases, properties had been acquired by coalition members shortly after the owners had died, under circumstances that, while ruled accidental or suicidal at the time, appeared suspicious when re-examined. One case in particular stood out: the 1934 death of Samuel Richardson, a farmer whose property had adjoined the Blackwoods. Richardson had allegedly committed suicide by hanging himself in his barn just 3 months after the Blackwoods' disappearance. His farm had subsequently been purchased by James Caldwell, the banker who, according to Eleanor's journal, had accompanied William Sullivan to the Blackwood farm on that final documented day. Detective Harmon located and interviewed Richardson's granddaughter, Judith Pearson, now living in Columbus. Pearson shared a family story that had been passed down through generations. "My father always said his father didn't kill himself. He said Grandpa Sam had been friends with a neighboring farmer who disappeared with his wife that summer. Grandpa had been asking questions about what happened to them, saying it wasn't right that the bank foreclosed so quickly after they vanished. Dad said that's when the threats started. Grandpa found dead animals on his porch. His well was poisoned. And then they found him hanging in the barn. The sheriff called it suicide, but Dad always said there was no way Grandpa would have done that. He wasn't that kind of man." This testimony added another layer to the emerging pattern. It seemed increasingly likely that Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood had stumbled upon evidence of criminal activity by the Athens Business Coalition, perhaps a conspiracy to force people off their land through intimidation, sabotage, or worse. And when Eleanor took physical evidence of this conspiracy from her father's study, they became targets themselves. But this still didn't explain the most puzzling aspect of the case: why the couple had been found embracing at the bottom of their own well, rather than showing signs of a struggle or separate disposal of their bodies, as might be expected in a murder. The answer came from an unexpected source. During the continued development of the subdivision, workers excavating for utility lines discovered a hidden root cellar beneath what had once been the Blackwood farmhouse. Inside, preserved in the cool, dry environment, was a metal ammunition box containing several items. A man's pocket watch stopped at 11:17, a woman's locket containing a small photograph of a young couple, and most significantly, a sealed mason jar containing several sheets of paper. The papers were official documents from the Athens County Bank, dated 1933. They detailed a systematic plan for acquiring specific properties throughout the county at below-market rates, using various means of persuasion when owners were reluctant to sell. Each property was listed with a target acquisition date and the name of the coalition member who would ultimately take ownership. The Blackwood farm was listed for acquisition in August 1933, with William Sullivan himself designated as the future owner. Most disturbing was a separate list headed "Special Handling Required," which included the names of several property owners, including Thomas Blackwood. Next to each name was the initials of a coalition member, apparently assigned to deal with that particular problem. Next to Thomas Blackwood's name were the initials W.S., William Sullivan, Eleanor's own father. These documents confirmed what Eleanor's journal had hinted at. Her father and his business associates had been engaged in a criminal conspiracy to force people from their land during the Depression, using whatever means necessary. Eleanor had discovered evidence of this conspiracy and had taken it, likely hoping to expose her father's crimes. In response, Sullivan and his associates had come to reclaim the evidence and silence both Eleanor and her husband. But there was still the mystery of how the couple had ended up embracing at the bottom of their well. Dr. Catherine Wells, the forensic anthropologist, provided a theory based on her examination of the remains. There were no obvious signs of trauma to either skeleton that would indicate a violent death prior to entering the well. No bullet wounds, no blunt force trauma to the skulls or other bones. This suggests they may have been alive when they entered the well. Given the depth of the well and the position of the bodies, I believe they may have been placed there intentionally, possibly after being incapacitated but not killed. Detective Harmon's theory, based on all available evidence, painted a chilling picture of the couple's final moments. Sullivan and his associates had likely returned to the Blackwood farm, perhaps with local law enforcement complicit in their scheme, to recover the incriminating documents and eliminate the threat that Thomas and Eleanor posed, rather than shooting them or otherwise killing them outright, which might raise questions even in those lawless times. They had chosen a more insidious method, placing the couple in the abandoned well and sealing it, leaving them to die slowly in the darkness. The embrace in which they were found wasn't the result of how they were placed in the well, but rather a final, desperate act of love and comfort as they faced their inevitable fate together. In their final moments, knowing they couldn't escape, Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood had held onto each other, their hands clasped together in a grip that would endure for nearly a century. The Athens County Prosecutor's Office reviewed Detective Harmon's findings, but ultimately concluded that no charges could be filed, as all direct participants in the crimes were deceased. However, the case generated significant media attention, both locally and nationally. The story of the young couple found still embracing after 90 years resonated with people, as did the tale of corruption and conspiracy that had led to their deaths. In October 2024, Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood were finally laid to rest in the Millfield Cemetery, their remains still together as they had been for 9 decades. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including descendants of both the Blackwood and Sullivan families. The Sullivan descendants, upon learning the truth about their ancestors' actions, established a scholarship fund at Ohio University in Thomas and Eleanor's names. The subdivision that had been planned for the site was abandoned after the discoveries. Instead, the land was purchased by a historical preservation trust and converted into a memorial park dedicated to victims of the Great Depression. At the center of the park stands a stone monument marking the location of the well, with a simple inscription, "Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood, separated in life, united in death, discovered in truth. But this is not where our story ends. As Detective Harmon continued her research into the Athens Business Coalition, she began to uncover connections to other prominent families in the region, families whose descendants still hold positions of power and influence throughout southeastern Ohio. The coalition's reach, it seemed, had extended far beyond Athens County, with similar patterns of suspicious deaths and property acquisitions documented in surrounding counties as well. More troublingly, Harmon discovered evidence suggesting that the coalition hadn't simply disbanded after the Depression ended. Rather, it had evolved, operating under different names throughout the decades, its members continuing to use their collective influence to shape local politics and business to their advantage. Property records revealed that many of the parcels acquired during the Depression had remained within the same families for generations, passing from the original coalition members to their descendants, who now control much of the region's wealth and resources. In 2024, as Detective Harmon prepared to publish her findings in a comprehensive report, strange things began to happen. Files went missing from the evidence room. Her computer was hacked, with months of research deleted. She received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, nothing but silence on the other end of the line. Her house was broken into, though nothing of value was taken. The message was clear. Someone didn't want this story told. Then in January 2025, Sarah Harmon disappeared. Her car was found abandoned along a rural road outside Millfield, not 5 miles from where the Blackwoods remains had been discovered. A search was conducted, but no trace of the detective has been found. The official position is that Harmon, who had been under significant stress due to her obsession with a 90-year-old case, likely left of her own accord. Her colleagues note that she had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before her disappearance, speaking of being watched and followed. But those who knew her best don't believe she would have abandoned her investigation. They point to the files she had secretly backed up on a private server, files that detail connections between the historical Athens Business Coalition and current power structures in southeastern Ohio, files that name names and outline a conspiracy that has continued in various forms for nearly a century. These files include reference to a recurring meeting of prominent business leaders and politicians from throughout the region, held annually on the anniversary of the stock market crash of 1929. The location changes each year, but the purpose remains the same: to ensure the continued prosperity of member families by any means necessary. According to Harmon's research, the most recent meeting was scheduled for October 29, 2025, just days from now. Perhaps most disturbing of all are the notes Harmon made regarding an unexpected pattern she discovered while reviewing missing persons reports from the region over the past 90 years. Every decade, almost like clockwork, a young couple disappears from one of the rural communities in southeastern Ohio. In most cases, they are eventually presumed to have left the area voluntarily. But in Harmon's files, she had mapped these disappearances against property acquisitions by descendants of original coalition members. The correlation was undeniable. The most recent such disappearance occurred in 2023, just months before the Blackwoods remains were discovered. Michael and Jennifer Carson vanished from their recently purchased farmhouse outside Gloucester, leaving behind all their possessions. Their families insist they would never have left without saying goodbye. The property they had purchased, which had been on the market for years with no interested buyers, was acquired at auction by a development company owned by the great-grandson of James Caldwell, the banker who had been present on the Blackwoods' final documented day. As of today, the whereabouts of Michael and Jennifer Carson remain unknown. No wells have been excavated on their property, not yet, at least. And what of the documents that Eleanor Blackwood took from her father's study, the ones that started this tragic chain of events? Despite the discovery of the bank papers in the root cellar, the original documents that Eleanor took were never found. Detective Harmon believed they might still be hidden somewhere on the property, perhaps in another part of the well that hasn't yet been excavated, or in some other hiding place that has remained undiscovered for 90 years. If those documents exist, they might contain information even more damning than what has already been uncovered, perhaps evidence that the Athens Business Coalition's activities went beyond forcing people from their land. There are whispers among the oldest residents of Athens County of other crimes from that era, unexplained disappearances that have nothing to do with property acquisition, strange gatherings at the Sullivan estate on moonless nights, unusual symbols found carved into trees and fence posts throughout the county. Some say the coalition's true purpose was never about business at all, that the acquisition of wealth and power was merely a means to an end, a way to fund and conceal activities of a far darker nature, activities that continue to this day, hidden beneath the respectable facade of small-town politics and old family money. As Detective Harmon's files continue to circulate among a small group of trusted journalists and independent investigators, more connections between past and present begin to emerge. The story of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood has become a thread that, when pulled, threatens to unravel a tapestry of corruption and hidden influence that has shaped this region for nearly a century. 2 weeks after Detective Harmon's disappearance, a local historian named Daniel Reeves came forward with a startling discovery. While researching an unrelated matter in the county archives, he had stumbled upon a series of death certificates from 1933 to 1937, all signed by the same coroner, Dr. Edward Mitchell. What caught Reeves' attention was a curious pattern. In each case where the deceased had been a property owner, whose land was later acquired by a member of the Athens Business Coalition, Dr. Mitchell had ruled the death either accidental or suicidal, despite circumstances that often suggested otherwise. It was the language he used that first caught my eye, Reeves explained to a reporter from the Athens Messenger, almost identical phrasing in each case, as if he were working from a template. No evidence of foul play. Deceased showed signs of recent melancholia. Financial troubles likely contributed to state of mind. These phrases appear again and again, even in cases where friends and family insisted the deceased had been in good spirits or had been managing their financial difficulties successfully. Further investigation revealed that Dr. Mitchell had been William Sullivan's personal physician before being appointed county coroner in 1932, an appointment that came shortly after the formation of the Athens Business Coalition. More significantly, property records showed that Mitchell had purchased a substantial home in Athens in 1934, despite the Depression, and had sent his 3 children to prestigious universities, expenses that would have been well beyond the means of a typical county coroner during that era. The implication was clear. Dr. Mitchell had been complicit in covering up murders committed by the coalition, ruling suspicious deaths as accidents or suicides to avoid investigations that might have exposed the truth. In return, he had been well compensated for his silence and cooperation. This discovery lent credence to Detective Harmon's theory that the coalition's activities had been facilitated by corrupting key officials throughout the county. It wasn't just the coroner. Her files suggested that the sheriff, several judges, and even some state officials had been brought into the coalition's sphere of influence, either through bribery, blackmail, or the promise of future prosperity. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from an unexpected source. A nursing home resident named Harold Weber, who claimed to be the illegitimate son of James Caldwell, the banker involved in the Blackwood case, contacted Reeves after reading about his research in the local paper. Weber, 91 years old and in failing health, claimed to have knowledge about the coalition that he had kept secret his entire life. According to Weber, the Athens Business Coalition hadn't been formed simply to acquire property during the Depression. Its origins were darker and more complex. Father never acknowledged me publicly, but he supported my mother and me financially. When he was drinking, which was often in his later years, he would talk about things he'd done, things he'd been part of. He spoke of the coalition as something that had existed long before the Depression, said the economic crisis had just given them opportunities they couldn't have imagined before. Said they'd been waiting for something like that, planning for it even. Weber claimed that the coalition had its roots in a secret society formed in Athens County shortly after the Civil War, initially consisting of wealthy landowners and industrialists who sought to control local politics and business to their advantage. Over decades, this group had evolved and expanded its influence, operating under various names and guises, but always maintaining the same core purpose: to ensure the prosperity and power of its member families, regardless of the cost to others. Father said they had rules, rituals even. New members were initiated at the old Sullivan estate during the dark of the moon. They swore oaths on something he called the Ledger, a book that contained the names of every member dating back to the beginning, along with records of their contributions to the cause. He said William Sullivan was the keeper of the ledger during his time. That's why they were so desperate to get those papers back from Sullivan's daughter. They were afraid she'd found the ledger, or at least pages from it. Weber's account, if true, suggested that the Athens Business Coalition had been far more than a group of opportunistic businessmen exploiting the Depression. It had been part of a multi-generational conspiracy to control the region, with roots stretching back decades before the Blackwoods' deaths and branches extending well into the present day. Most chilling was Weber's claim about the coalition's methods for dealing with those who opposed them. They had a ritual for eliminating enemies. Father called it the binding. They would take the person, sometimes a couple if both were involved, to a prepared location, usually a well or mine shaft. There would be a ceremony of sorts, invoking old names that Father would never repeat to me. Then they would place the victims in the hole, sometimes after giving them a sedative so they wouldn't fight, but always conscious, always aware. Then they would seal it up and leave them there. Father said it was important that they die slowly, in the dark, bound to the earth. Said their fear fed something, strengthened the pact between coalition members. So I thought it was just the whiskey talking, just an old man's delusions, but now with what they found in that well, Weber died 3 days after speaking with Reeves, reportedly from natural causes related to his advanced age and poor health. The nursing home staff noted that he had seemed agitated in his final days, often claiming that men he didn't recognize had been visiting other residents and asking questions about him. Meanwhile, the investigation into Detective Harmon's disappearance continued, though with less urgency, as weeks passed with no new leads. The official theory remained that she had left voluntarily, possibly due to mental health issues stemming from her obsession with the Blackwood case. Her colleagues noted that she had become increasingly secretive before her disappearance, unwilling to share her research or theories, except with a select few individuals whom she trusted. One of those individuals was Melissa Chen, a graduate student in sociology at Ohio University, who had been assisting Harmon with research into historical property records. Chen came forward after Harmon's disappearance, sharing what she knew of the detective's final investigations. Sarah believed the coalition never disbanded. It just evolved, Chen explained. She had mapped connections between the original members and current power structures throughout southeastern Ohio. Business leaders, politicians, judges, law enforcement, she believed they were all connected through this hidden network of influence that dated back to the original coalition, and she was convinced they were still active, still protecting their interests by any means necessary. According to Chen, Harmon had identified several families in the region whose wealth and influence could be traced directly back to the original coalition members. These families had intermarried over generations, consolidating their power and resources. They controlled key industries, held important political offices, sat on the boards of major regional institutions, and contributed heavily to political campaigns at both the state and local level. Sarah believed they were particularly interested in land acquisition around Millfield because of what's underneath it, Chen continued. Geological surveys have indicated significant natural gas deposits in that area. The land where the Blackwoods' remains were found is part of a larger tract that a development company called Southeastern Holdings has been trying to acquire for years. That company is owned by a consortium of investors, all of whom are descendants of original coalition members. Chen shared Harmon's theory that the discovery of the Blackwoods' remains had been an accident that threatened to expose not just historical crimes, but ongoing criminal conspiracies. The detective had believed that the coalition's modern incarnation was planning something significant, something connected to the upcoming anniversary meeting that her research had uncovered. The last time I spoke with Sarah, she told me she was close to finding what she called the Ledger, the book that supposedly contained records of all coalition activities dating back to its formation. She believed it had been passed down through generations of keepers, with each new keeper adding to its contents. According to her sources, the current keeper is Charles Sullivan, William Sullivan's great-grandson and the CEO of Sullivan Financial Group. Charles Sullivan, 67 years old, is one of the most prominent businessmen in southeastern Ohio. His company, Sullivan Financial Group, controls numerous smaller banks throughout the region and has significant investments in real estate, energy, and technology. He serves on the boards of several universities and hospitals, contributes heavily to political campaigns across the political spectrum, and is generally regarded as a pillar of the community, known for his philanthropic efforts. Sullivan has publicly dismissed the revelations about his great-grandfather as unfortunate historical events that have no bearing on the present. He has expressed sympathy for the Blackwood family and contributed substantially to the memorial park established on the site of their farm. When questioned about Detective Harmon's disappearance, he expressed hope that she would be found safe and offered to fund a reward for information leading to her discovery. Yet public records reveal troubling connections. Sullivan Financial Group owns a 30% stake in Southeastern Holdings, the development company attempting to acquire land around Millfield. His corporation has filed numerous lawsuits against small property owners in the region who have refused to sell their land. And campaign finance records show that he has donated heavily to the election campaigns of several judges who later ruled in his favor in property disputes. Most disturbing of all is the pattern of disappearances that continues to plague the region. In the 2 years prior to the discovery of the Blackwoods remains, 3 individuals who had publicly opposed Sullivan's business interests had gone missing: an environmental activist who had been fighting against fracking on historic lands, a journalist who had been investigating Sullivan Financial Group's lending practices, and a small-town mayor who had blocked Sullivan's attempt to purchase municipal water rights. In each case, the disappearances were eventually attributed to voluntary departure or accident. The environmental activist was said to have moved to South America, though no passport activity has been recorded. The journalist's car was found at the bottom of a ravine, but his body was never recovered. The mayor's boat was discovered drifting on a local lake with no sign of its occupant. Are these coincidences? Unconnected tragedies? Or evidence of the coalition's continued activities, stretching across nearly a century, from the deaths of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood to the present day? Local law enforcement officials have dismissed such connections as conspiracy theories, citing lack of evidence. The FBI, when contacted about the possibility of a regional criminal conspiracy, stated that they do not comment on potential investigations, but would review any credible evidence brought to their attention. Meanwhile, Charles Sullivan continues his public life as a respected business leader and philanthropist. His company continues to acquire property throughout the region, and on October 29, 2025, according to Detective Harmon's files, he will host a private gathering at his estate outside Athens, a gathering attended by dozens of influential individuals from throughout southeastern Ohio, all with connections to the original coalition families. What occurs at these gatherings? Are they simply social events for the region's elite, opportunities to network and discuss business, or are they something darker, as Detective Harmon believed, continuations of the ritualistic meetings that Harold Weber described, where new members are initiated, new contributions are recorded in the ledger, and new enemies are marked for elimination? The truth remains elusive, buried beneath decades of secrecy and concealed by the power and influence of those who would keep it hidden. But sometimes, secrets find their way to the surface. Sometimes, like the remains of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood, the past refuses to stay buried. 2 weeks after Harold Weber's death, Daniel Reeves received an anonymous package at his office at the Athens Historical Society. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. A note attached to it read simply, "Weber's final gift. Be careful who you trust." The journal appeared to be a personal diary belonging to William Sullivan, dated 1932 to 1935. Many pages had been removed, and others were damaged or illegible, but what remained painted a disturbing picture of Sullivan's involvement in the coalition and his role in his daughter's death. One entry, dated August 4, 1933, the day after Eleanor's final journal entry, was particularly chilling. "It is done. The matter has been resolved, though not as I would have wished. Eleanor left me no choice. The sanctity of the covenant must be preserved regardless of the cost. Caldwell assures me the property will be transferred to my name by month's end, as agreed. I find no satisfaction in this acquisition. Let the record show that I have fulfilled my obligation to the coalition, though it has cost me my only child. May those who follow understand the weight of the oath we have taken and the price we must sometimes pay to maintain the order established by our forefathers." Another entry, dated October 29, 1933. Exactly 92 years before the upcoming gathering at Charles Sullivan's estate, described a ceremony at Sullivan's home. Annual observance completed. 3 new members inducted. the ledger updated with their names and initial contributions. Caldwell's handling of the Richardson situation approved by all present. His property to be transferred after the necessary interval has passed. Mitchell reports no complications in his official findings. The binding ritual was particularly effective this cycle. Turner believes the energy harvested will sustain us through the coming year, though some feel additional harvests may be necessary if conditions worsen. The journal makes repeated references to the binding, harvests, and energy without explicitly explaining these terms. But the context suggests something far more sinister than mere business dealings, something occult, ritualistic, tied to the method by which the coalition eliminated its enemies and the purpose behind those eliminations. The final legible entry, dated April 12, 1935, hints at conflict within the coalition, disagreement with Caldwell regarding expansion. He believes we should extend our influence beyond Athens County, establish chapters in neighboring counties under our guidance. I counsel patience. Our power grows naturally as our families connect with others of influence. There is no need to rush what time will accomplish on its own. The ledger remains secure. I have instructed my son in his duties as the next keeper. When the time comes, he will understand the responsibility that passes to him, just as I understood when my father passed it to me. The covenant endures. The harvest continues. The binding maintains order. After sharing copies of the journal with trusted colleagues, Reeves placed the original in a secure location, its whereabouts known only to him. He continues his research into the Athens Business Coalition and its modern incarnation, though he admits to growing increasingly cautious. He has installed security cameras at his home and office. He varies his routine daily. He has prepared documents detailing his findings to be released to multiple news outlets in the event of his disappearance or death. I'm not paranoid, he insists. I'm realistic about what happens to people who dig too deeply into this particular history. Detective Harmon isn't the first person to disappear while investigating the coalition. I've found records of at least 7 other individuals over the past 90 years who vanished after asking too many questions about Sullivan, Caldwell, and their associates. I don't intend to become number 8, but I also don't intend to stop searching for the truth. That truth remains elusive, hidden in missing pages from William Sullivan's journal, in the unrecovered documents that Eleanor Blackwood took from her father's study, in the legendary ledger that supposedly records a century of the coalition's activities, and perhaps most significantly, in the minds of those who continue the coalition's work today. What is known with certainty is this: Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood died holding on to each other in the darkness of their own well, victims of a conspiracy that valued power and wealth above all else, even family bonds. Their remains, still embracing after 90 years, serve as a testament both to the love they shared in life and to the evil they confronted in their final days. Their story has finally been told, at least in part. But the larger story, the one that connects their deaths to others across nearly a century, continues to unfold. The Athens Business Coalition, or whatever name its modern incarnation operates under, remains a shadow presence in southeastern Ohio, felt but unseen, its influence permeating local politics, business, and law enforcement.